Okay, welcome back everyone. Hopefully you guys have something to write with and something to write on. I thought you were just picking your teeth. Okay, democratic participation is all about voting. Your written assignment, which you'll have 2 class days to work on, it's just a paragraph, is on voting as well. So paying attention today would help. Key term here, voter turnout. That is the number of people who vote from the number of people who can vote, right? So not everyone can vote. We've already discussed that. People under the age of 18, people who aren't citizens, people who are criminals can't vote, potentially. What's that?
That's not true.
In Canada, criminals can vote?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Really? So somebody commits murder, they can just vote?
Mm-hmm. They set up polling stations in prisons.
What if they're in jail?
Yeah, they set up polling stations in prisons.
Well, you learn something new every day, kids, but that's interesting.
I know.
In America, if you have a felony, like if you're a serious criminal, you can't vote, right? And so in America, they do cite racism quite a bit, that certain groups of people get incarcerated more, sent to prison more often, and that that limits those communities from voting. It's probably a sensitive issue. I'm sure many people feel like, hey, if you commit crime, you broke the law, well, you should lose that right to vote and get a say. It's tough to say. I looked over some of the discussion questions, and these are things we've already discussed, so we're just going to get through this quickly so you have more time to do your written assignment. Okay. Here's just a look at the graph we looked at a couple lessons ago of voter turnout. So again, you are kind of seeing a downwards trend generally, but it seems like the trend of people voting is coming back up, potentially as younger people start to realize that who is in charge actually matters. Politics will end up on your doorstep whether you like it or not. As younger or middle-aged people get more involved in the political process, recognizing that maybe there was a time back in the day where you could just live carefree and not worry about what the government was doing because they weren't necessarily interfering with your life. But as global events shifting mindsets as well. Okay, here is a colorful little graphic, and it also has size bubbles as well. So as you can see, the biggest bubbles for voter turnout, the number of people who can vote, who actually show up to vote. The largest bubbles are in the 55 to 74 categories, right? And we already discussed how those people generally might have been born and raised around a time where governance actually meant something, and maybe they knew their government, politicians better. Maybe there was more sense of community, so the person running was someone you knew knows. Whereas nowadays, many of us probably feel very removed from our politicians. So it makes sense that a lot of younger people are voting less. Maybe they don't care to, don't realize, or don't want to for whatever reasons. We've already had this discussion with previous lessons. This is a chart just looking at first-time voters. I think we've seen it before in a different PowerPoint as well, but as you can see, those numbers are getting lower and lower. So young people back in the day, so it looks like around the 60s, there was a higher percentage of first-time voters actually showing up, right? So every election year, every time there's an election, there's going to be a certain number of people, it's their first time being able to vote in a provincial, federal election, municipal. Back in the day, this chart is telling us that more of those people came out to vote than now. And we discussed some of those reasons, like maybe people don't understand how to vote, maybe they feel a little anxious or stressed, or maybe there's a degree of paperwork involved and that's too much for some people to do. It's tough to say why young people nowadays aren't really voting. Just saying they conducted some research, and yeah, it seems like in our previous discussions, the 2 main reasons is motivation. So some young people don't feel motivated to go out and vote, and that could be literally like, I don't really feel like leaving my house today. There's no Uber votes, so I can't get the voting poll to come to my house.
So,
I love how your eyes lit up when I said that. But
so, the poll can't really come to your house, but, parties will get volunteers to drive people to the polls, or even Elections Canada, if there's mobility issues, you can call them and see if they'll be able to drive you. And then I know in the last election, when people like had like COVID and stuff, they would send an elections officer to their doorstep and knock on the door, and then there would be a ballot there, and then the person would put the ballot outside the door, and then they would put it in a box.
that's so fascinating. So the mobility stuff makes a lot of sense. You know, if you're in a wheelchair, you have some sort of lack of ability where you can't get to places easily. That's excellent, right? That the government is putting aside some funds to get those people where they need to be. The other stuff seems a little like, I don't know, like if a polling station shows up at my door and whatnot, like, I don't know, I would be curious about security, right? Thank you for patiently waiting.
Can you get mail-in ballots too?
I mean, there's a big discussion around mail-in ballots, and I think a lot of people, I mean, there's a part of that discussion says no, because you can't protect, you can't keep the election secure. That same side might say, well, what's to stop people from destroying those ballots, like, before they get into a ballot box? You know, there are questions of security. I don't know what they're doing in Canada per se, but I know in America, like obviously the last presidential election in America, there was a big concern. Like Donald Trump was saying, like, hey, you know, ballots were getting destroyed. And then I don't know what became of that. I do recall seeing videos where they're showing, like, yeah, these people are tossing out ballots. You know, so it's tricky to get to the bottom of. What do we think? You know, should you be allowed to mail in your vote?
Well, that's kind of a tricky topic. Like, I don't really think so. I think if somebody like can't get to the poll, or say if they have an illness and they can't go to the hospital or something, I think that the government should like send people out and do that kind of thing. But also, it's a question of like security and that kind of thing. But
Well, and then you need a lot of personnel to then also facilitate how do we determine who can and can't make it to the polling station,
yeah.
right? It's kind of like, I think this process happened with diplomas, so every student gets double time. When I wrote diplomas, you had 3 hours, and if you wanted more time, you had to request it. And I think my understanding is that rather than dealing with those requests individually, they just gave everyone double time, and they say, well, 6 hours is the max amount of time you have. So I could see how it could easily go from, well, some people are sick and let's get a polling station to their house or to their hospital bed, to, well, why not just do that for everyone, right? And then it does come back to potentially concerns about election security. We'll answer quickly and then we'll go.
There is like certain exceptions where they do set up polling stations. Like they've set them up in like seniors' homes and things like that, just so they don't have to bring like 60 grandmas outside and walk them to the polling station. So they bring the polling station to the seniors' home, and then but
I mean, it is kind of a sad reality, but a lot of old folks past 65, 70, 75, you know, they really struggle to just walk. It's not that they're like in a wheelchair or something, but just due to the lack of preparing their body or whatever injuries they occurred, you know, they can't walk. So being able to help those groups of people be able to still participate is very useful. Oops. I think the only one that we really haven't talked about here is, well, actually cynicism we have talked about. Okay. Here's a couple of the reasons. You don't need to write this down. Eventually I'll post this PowerPoint. This video will be on YouTube as well, but people who just don't have an interest in politics, and I think that that's a lot of people. Let's make sure we're listening at the back. People who don't know enough, and so that's going to be a tricky, vicious cycle of I don't know enough, so I'm not interested, and I'm not interested because I don't know enough. Cynicism. Do you understand what this word is? Anyone? Have we heard this word before? Someone who's cynical. I don't know the exact definition, but someone who's cynical usually has a negative outlook on life. So they might say something like, well, government's corrupt, right? They're being cynical, and they're using that as their reasoning for not participating. Okay. Not really a belief system I would want to follow in, being cynical about things. Relevance, so that no party spoke to the issues that concern them. So sometimes political parties will just speak to issues that affect their platform, their people who they think are going to vote. So you were mentioning earlier that in Manitoba there was a provincial election and the NDP won, and it seems like they won. They won last night, and it seems like they won on the grounds of we're going to investigate some murders that occurred, and the other party isn't. I don't know if that's true, but
Yeah, it's so like there was this murderer that I think he was convicted of murdering these two people, and he said that their bodies were in this landfill, and it's a part of the like missing and murdered Indigenous women movement, and the Conservative government that was just voted out last night